Na-confuse ako doon kasi mag-record ako. Okay. So going back, it's constant with a value of 9.81 meters per second. This should be squared actually. So may correction dito sa file. And it's represented by the variable g. The motion of a object in free fall is described by these equations, which are x for your position and v, which is your velocity. Both of these are time-dependent equations, and you can use them to model the motion of your object with respect to time. These are your instantaneous velocities and relative positions, which you may have already encountered in Physics 71, lalo na at its FQ1 season ngayon. So, dito tayo sa main point ng experiment na ito. Since we will not be doing the experiment, we will rather focus on the other aspect, which is graphical analysis. So, sa graphical analysis, we are using visual aids to represent data instead of just writing them down sa mga tables and sa computations. This part of the experiment manual describes the different parts of a graph. Para mas madali, let us look at an actual graph while we do this. So ito, meron akong graph on the right side of the screen while I have the descriptors on the left. So let's go one by one dito. So ang first part ng graph na nilista ay axis. So ang axis is basically ito, yung x-axis and y-axis. So these are coordinate systems kung saan nilalagay natin yung ating mga data. We are plotting our data against these coordinates. Normally, yung x-axis, which represents your independent variable, ay dito sa horizontal x-axis. Habang yung dependent variable naman ay sa y-axis. Next, axis labels. You want your labels to be including units. So, ililabel mo yung mga axis ninyo para malaman ng ibang tao na magbabasa, for example, kung ano ba yung dinidescribe ng data, kung ano ba yung mini-measure nyo. And for additional detail, laging lalagay ang units sa axis labels. Kasi ito, for example, you are measuring time in this example graph. Pero pag tinanggal ko yung units, somebody could assume that the time is in days or minutes or hours. So for clarity's sake, nilalagay dyan ang unit ng whatever your axis is representing. Similar case dito sa velocity ng example graph natin. This is in meters per second. Next is your data points. So yung data points, yung mismo kinokollect mo sa experiment. Normally, these are represented as dots doon sa mismong graph mo. Hindi masyadong kita. Let's zoom in a little bit. So yung may mga ano dito, itong may mga gray. So nandito yung data point somewhere. Teka, hanap tayo ng ibang graph na mas klaro. Ito, this is another example graph. So they select itong parang clover. These are the actual data points that you get from your experiment. So one important thing, don't connect your data points together pag nagpa-plot kayo. Just leave them as dots. That's all that needs to happen. Next, the fourth part of our graph is a legend. So may isang graph dito. Ito, yan. Kapag nagre-represent kayo ng more than one data set sa isang graph, it's very useful to make a legend. A legend is basically a list. Kasi one data set should have a specific symbol or color attached to it. Halimbawa, ito. Meron akong dalawang velocity na ginraph and my legend says velocity 1, dataset of velocity 1 is represented by my blue dots. And another velocity, velocity 2, na isa pang separate dataset, is represented by my orange dots. So magkaibang datasets ito at may kanyang corresponding symbols ito. Again, this is for clarity's sake para madali siyang mabasa. And you can represent your data in a proper manner. Next are your error bars. Ang error bars, well, it's basically just the graphical representation ng uncertainty ninyo. Ang error bars ito, itong mga parang black na letter I. So merong horizontal and vertical. So lagi silang nakapalibot sa isang data point. If you recall, ang isang error bar ay ang uncertainty rather, ay representation ng possible values where a true value may lie. So kaya siya ganito ang itsura kasi in line with that definition, your uncertainty is an interval. So yung representation niya sa graph ay parang interval din. So basically, if there were a true value here, it would lie anywhere inside this interval here. Next is a trend line. Ang trend line, which is also known as a regression line, is a best fit line of the data. In other words, ang isang trend line, which is represented by the dotted lines here for both velocity 1 and velocity 2, a trend line describes, well, as the name implies, the trend that a dataset follows. It can be used to predict values if needed. For example, may trend line ako dito na kulay black. Tapos I have the equation of the line. If I were to extrapolate values, for example, for times na lampas dito sa 9.5, pwede kong sundan yung line and to a good degree of probability, pwede nang mapipredict ng trend line na ito ang values na hindi kasama sa actual dataset ko. To a certain degree. It's not guaranteed, but it's a good chance. Along with the trend line is what you call your R-squared value. I won't go into too much detail regarding the R-squared value kasi its definition is primarily based sa statistics. Pero what we can do instead is describe its practical use. Ang R-squared value, isang measure yan kung gaano kaganda ang trend mo and how good your data fits into that trend. Ang R-squared mo can take values between 0 and 1. Basically, the closer it is to 1, the better. So for this particular graph, ang bawat dataset ko ay may R-squared value ng 0.9988. That's pretty good kasi ang lapit sa 1. This means that the trend line fits the data in a nice way or in a fitting way. So maganda yung fit ng trend line natin. Lastly, title and caption. So you want to label your graph. Normally, yung title mo is placed on top of your graph. Tingnan natin kung may examples dito. Ito, for our graph here, VT graph, yun yung kanyang title. It should include the dependent and dependent variables of the corresponding experiment. It can be in words. Halimbawa, ito. The graph of velocity versus time. Pwede rin ganun yung title niyo. Actually, that's a better way kasi it's more complete. On the other hand, you have your caption. It's a short but complete description of the graph and is usually written in sentence form. Note that it's usually written, but it does not have to be in sentence form for some cases. A caption can be generally longer than your title, and it can put more emphasis and be more complete. Titles can be omitted when captions are present. They can be together, but they don't have to be. For example, ano ang caption ko dito sa graph na ito? Ang caption ko dito, itong nasa ilalim, to figure velocity versus time graph of a freely falling particle. Notice dito na hindi naka-sentence form yung caption. Kasi nga, sabi lang naman, usually written. So, pwede niyong gawin yan, pwedeng hindi. It's up to you. Mas recommended lang na sentence form gawin. So, the materials used for this experiment, if you were doing it, is picket fence, photo gate. At dahil hindi naman tayo makagawa ng experiment mismo, just like with the last experiment, I think it would be more appropriate to maybe just watch a related video on it. So, let's watch this video. Pakisabi na lang kung walang sound mamaya pag nagsalita na yung participant. Naririnig niyo naman? May sound ba nagpi-play?
May onti po, pero
Onti?
parang hindi po siya
Ayan.
masyadong
Hearin mo.
malinaw.
Ganun ba? Sige, ano na lang. May subtitle naman. Well, yung main point ng ano mamaya.
So for this experiment, the picket fence was dropped through there, and you can measure velocity displacement. So that's what we'll do here. So show you how it's collected.
Okay, so yun lang basically naman yung point ng experiment. As in free fall, itong ano tawag dito, picket fence, hinulog lang niya na nakapagitan siya dito sa sensor na parang pa letter C. So, kung mapapansin niyo, ang design ng picket fence ay alternating bands ng clear at saka black. Kapag tumama dun sa habang nahuhulog yung picket fence, pag nakatapat dun sa black portion, nagkakaroon ng signal doon sa detector nyo, which is yung letter C looking thing. Teka, punta tayo dito sa manual. Itong photo gate, yun, photo gate ang tawag. So every time dumaan siya doon sa doon sa black portion, there is a signal that's corresponding to a certain time, velocity, and position. Whatever those data points are, they are recorded by your computer. So, magkakaroon ka, kung pupunta naman tayo sa data set, we will thus have a record of your time, distance, velocity, and acceleration. So yung gate 1 state dito, pag bubuksan ninyo yung mga data sets ninyo from Movle, mapapansin ninyo na may ones and zeros ito. If your gate 1 state is 1, this means that you will be recording data. may data recorded for distance, velocity, and acceleration. While if your gate 1 state is 0, wala. So when you are going to do your graphical analysis for this experiment, para mas mapadali, just delete the gate 1 states na 0 kasi these don't matter for your experiment. So just like here, i-delete ko. Yan, ito lang kailangan ko. So ito lang, i-retain ko. Anyway, going back. So pagbabasa niyo itong procedure, syempre di naman natin pwedeng gawin, sadly. So if you're going to use your manual, you can skip directly to step 11. Last step basically. Well, second to the last. So si step 11 ay general instructions on how to use Excel to create a graph to analyze your data. If you are using Apple products, hindi ko alam ang equivalent, pero you can use Google Sheets. It's an online equivalent of the spreadsheet application. So you can also do this. Now, since ang Excel ay magkakaiba ang operation based on your version, I'm willing to help you guys pag magkaiba tayo ng version. Bali kayo ang mag-share screen tapos tulungan ko kayong i-navigate yung Excel para mas makita niyo kung paano gamitin siya. So as an example, let's plot something from here. Let's adjust our ito. So kung gagawa ako ng plot, so sabi, I will go to insert. Tapos tingnan niyo itong version ko ng Excel. Ang charts ay represented as drawings na. So I will go to insert, select charts, select scatter option. Tapos daw, I will right click and select data. Meron dito somewhere. So mag-a-add ako ng data set dito. Gusto kong i-add si let's say si velocity versus time. Mag-add tayo series name velocity versus time. The series X values ko. Kapag magse-select kayo ng series X values, isang set ng X values yan. So you can usually do this in Excel by clicking one, your top data point, and dragging it down. Similarly, sa series Y values, normally kapag nag-Excel kayo, tapos sa series Y values, may data point na dyan. Tanggalin nyo yan kasi default lang yan. So, ayan siya. Okay ko lang to. And okay again. Look, I already have my data points plotted. So, I can add more data sets by using add after data series. O, select data ulit. Halimbawa, gusto ko mag-add ng isa pa. Tanggalin ko ulit to. Gusto ko mag-add lang ako tapos I'm gonna do the same process. Tapos magkakaroon na ng another graph dyan. So, sa chart design tab, may lumalabas na ganito kapag sineselect mo yung graph. Tingnan nyo. Nawawala siya, yung chart elements. So, mapapansin na sa Excel yan. Pag click nyo ito, lalabas to bigla. That's a convenient way of changing your, plot elements. So, under add chart elements, you can add your axes, titles. Mag-add ako. Axis titles pala, sorry. Primary horizontal. So, sabi dun, by the rules, label them with their corresponding units. So, time. Same sa vertical. Velocity. Meters per second. Title. So, ay chart title pala. above chart. So if I want medyo complete na title, itong isang example na pwede kong gawin. Plot of velocity versus time for free fall experiment. Isang example lang to na pwede niyong gawin. It's a phrase, but look, it conveys a large it conveys a good idea of how I can possibly interpret this. Kung halimbawa, magbabasa lang ako ng graph nyo, pero hindi ko alam yung ginawa nyo sa experiment. Malalaman ko agad kung ano ito at least. A combination of my chart title and axis titles gives me a good idea of what I can expect from your graphs. So this is good data representation that you can use kahit anong field pa kayo mapunta, not just physics. So this is very important to learn. So moving on, ayan, enter title, legends, axis labels. You can remove the grid lines by selecting them and press delete. Ito, ayan, marami ako na-select. Delete, tapos may vertical grid lines din. Nawala yung axis. Nawala yung axis. Kapag ganyan, nawala yung axis, pwede nyong lagyan lang ulit. Dito sa add chart element lang din. So, lastly, mag-add tayo ng trend line. In Excel, how do we do this? It's basically just, normally, right-click nyo to. Ayun, right-click. Add trend line. May option for that. Tapos, normally, automatic na yan. Magkakaroon na ng trend line. So, what we want to do here is have a visual representation. And now, for a written representation, pwede ka mag-display equation. And your R squared is simply calculated automatically. So, kung papansin niyo, yung R squared ko is 0.9995. So, it's a good fit. This is me. So, now, finally, let's go to our data set. So, ang table nito ay mayroon tayong results of the acceleration per trial from the position versus time graph. Using our data set, teka lang. Let's set this aside for now. I have to full screen it first. Let's set it aside for now. Okay. Kikita niyo sa data set ninyo, makita niyo there is a table for trial 1, trial 2, and trial 3. And for each time, for each trial, you have your unique data set for time, distance, velocity, and acceleration. So sa table 1, you are supposed to determine the results of the acceleration per trial from the position versus time graph. How do you do this? Well, if I were to graph, for example, itong dalawa, gawa akong graph. Scatter dapat, scatter. Yan. Nagawa akong trend line. Ano itong trend line ko? Line. So, pero yung data ko is not fitted by your line. If I were to determine the R squared right now, it would be a little bit lower than what I would expect as compared dun sa kanina. Now, what if I change my trend line to be a polynomial? So it's perfectly 1. Big sabihin, my trend line perfectly fits my data. So why is this parabolic? Well, if you recall sa free fall, alt-tab tayo sa manual, the position is described as a function of time by this kinematic equation. So may expect mo na parabolic nga talaga. So from here, kita nyo, may equation kayo for the trend line na may squared term, may linear term, and may constant. So makuha nyo yung acceleration, i-compare nyo dito. So si 1/2 A, kuha nyo dito sa trend line na squared term. So again, these are trial 1, trial 2, trial 3. You will basically do the same. You will have a plot for each. Tapos yung best estimate is the average of the 3 trials. And you will also calculate the percent error based on the accepted value, which is 9.81. Note that for this experiment, hindi kailangan mag-represent ng error bars or uncertainties. So yung measured acceleration lang talaga sa trial 1, 2, 3, best estimate is their average. So here you will have to plot kung ano man na-generate yung graphs, and you must superimpose the data from all 3 trials. What does superimpose mean? Basically, superimpose, ibig sabihin yan, you plot your multiple data points on top of each other. Data sets, rather. For example, ito, naka-superimpose itong dalawang ito on top of each other sa isang graph. 2 different data sets ito ng velocity. So that's just what it means to superimpose. So table 2, it's basically the same. Pero this time, you will plot velocity versus time. Tapos again, you will have to plot superimpose lang for 3 trials. And now for the questions, these are basically based on your theoretical knowledge of free fall. So you will have to supplement your Physics 71 knowledge using your lab knowledge. So pwede nyo actually gamitin yung Physics 71 lessons nyo para isagutin tong questions 1 to 4. So dito sa question 3, iyan ako lang, you can just sketch the graph and over the original plot. You don't have to plot yung magiging effect ng thrown downward and thrown upward. You can use your knowledge of free fall to answer these questions graphically by drawing. So basically, anong nag-iiba sa motion ng free fall kapag tinapon yung object? Pataas o pababa? Anong nag-iiba doon sa kinematic equations ko? Ano magiging difference? So that's how you answer questions 3 and 4. Lastly, sa question 5, comment on the uncertainty and precision of your data. Provide possible sources of error. Itong pangalawang section na ito, actually mahirap to kasi you didn't do your experiment eh. So I'm not expecting you to answer this second part of the question. You can, but I would appreciate it, but you don't have to. So you just comment on the accuracy and precision of your data. So you have multiple trials ng measurements. You have the theoretical value of G to compare. So you have all the tools you need to have a necessary assessment of accuracy and precision. So again, you will use the rest of the time to do your experiments. So that concludes my discussion on the experiment. So you guys have any questions? Wala naman. Okay, so again, meron pala, sorry. Okay naman. Okay.
Sir. Sorry.
Yes. Sige, okay lang.
Hindi po sa what do you call this? Hindi po sa mismong experiment, pero
Wait.
like
Which one?
general lang po, sir. Pwede pa po bang mag-edit ng answers pag na-submit na yung nasa Ovle? Or
Pwede.
okay.
Kapag hindi niyo ma-edit pala, by the way, sabihan niyo ako. Pwede kong baguhin, edit ko yung sa Ovle kapag hindi ma-edit.
Sige po, sir.
Pero pwede yan.
Okay po.